Welcome to another story made by Oracle 1. Ink and Bayonets. The biting cold of a December morning seeped through every crack of the trench, where mud clung to boots and bones alike. The incessant drone of artillery fire was a grim lullaby to the young men who huddled in the narrow, waterlogged slit, a stench of decay and gunpowder hanging heavy in the air. Among them sat Thomas Weller, a lanky, sharp-eyed soldier whose fingers, despite the biting cold, never ceased scribbling verses onto scraps of torn paper. Thomas was many things: a rifleman, a comrade, a survivor. Yet within him burned a quieter flame, as a poet, a soul who longed to capture on paper the horror, the futility, the human cost of this war. For months, he had concealed his identity as a blunt, anti-war poet, wary of the military censors and the prying eyes of officers who labeled such expressions as dangerous defeatism. But Thomas was driven by a moral imperative stronger than fear. The voices silenced on the battlefield needed words that laid bare the truth of their suffering. It was Christmas Eve, 1916. And the trenches near the Somme had settled into an uneasy truce, the bombardments slowing to a dull rumble as frost began to glaze the landscape. Thomas pulled his threadbare coat tighter around his thin frame, lit a candle flickering weakly beneath a rickety plank shelter, and unfurled a fresh piece of paper. His verse began tentatively, then flowed with increasing certainty. Beneath the mud, the fallen lie, not heroes, but boys who dared to die. No glory gleams in shattered cries, only silence where the promise dies. The words felt bitter on his tongue, truth that stung against the official tales of honor and valor that the army and government perpetuated. He clenched his jaw, resolving to see these verses beyond the front lines, beyond the censor's grasp. For weeks before, he had been corresponding with a small but determined group of underground pacifists and intellectuals based in London. Through encrypted letters and whispered messages, they shared clandestine presses that specialized in anti-war publications. Though treasonous accusations loomed, Thomas had resolved to send them his poems, the raw chronicle of the trenches, to be published and disseminated secretly among the soldiers and civilians alike. The challenge was perilous. The military surveilled mail rigorously, and any suspicion could mean court-martial or worse. Yet Thomas had managed to smuggle letters inside care packages, hollowed-out loaves of bread, and in the bindings of discarded trench newspapers. Each letter slipped into the world was a defiance, a flicker of dissent amid the relentless carnage. The night's quiet was shredded by a cry: "Shells incoming!" Men scrambled to duck the unseen menace overhead. Thomas dove into the muddied floor, ears ringing as the shells exploded around them, throwing dirt and splinters into the freezing air. His notebook was crushed beneath his coat, edges soaked with mud and blood. When the barrage ceased, Thomas clung to consciousness, half buried under debris and fallen webbing. A fellow soldier, Private Jameson, dragged him free, whispering urgently, "You've got to see the medics, Weller. This ain't the time to write verses." But Thomas's mind was a tempest. He gripped Jameson's sleeve. "Please, the letters. I need to send them. They must get out." In the makeshift hospital tent, the medic, a dour captain with tired eyes, scowled at Thomas. "No more nonsense, lad. You're lucky to be alive. War's hell, not poetry. Save your breath and your ink for later." But Thomas lay awake that night, trembling not from the injury to his leg, but from the pounding urgency in his chest. How many more men would die, erased from memory without so much as a name, while the men in suits far from the front wove tales of glory to justify the sacrifice? He resolved. Come dawn, he would send his newest batch of verses. They would carry the unvarnished truth beyond the muddy trenches. Several days later, when he was allowed a brief respite from the constant barrage, Thomas shared his poems with a select few. Among them was Lieutenant Henry Mills, a man Thomas had grown to respect for his quiet kindness and evident weariness of the war, buried beneath rigid military duty. "You really intend to have these published?" Henry asked, scanning a poem scrawled hastily on a damp piece of cardboard. Thomas nodded. "They need to be heard. The truth about this war. What kind of world do we leave if we silence those who suffer?" Henry hesitated, then whispered, "I'll help you. I know someone on leave with connections to a small press in London. But you must be careful, this is dangerous." The following weeks were a blur of nervous hope. Letters were written with painstaking care, secret addresses hidden in code, and the poems made their way out of the front lines. Thomas felt a tremor of fear mingled with hope every time a reply arrived, confirming receipt. One such letter arrived smudged and stained, a partially burned envelope marked with a discreet symbol. Inside lay a sheet of paper with a short message. "Your words have struck chords here. We've printed a small run of your verses under the title, Ink and Bayonets. Distribution is underway, but the censors are tightening their grip. Stay safe and keep writing." Thomas felt his heart leap and sink in the same breath. His secret was out, yet his verses, his truth, were alive in the world. But with exposure came peril. Rumors began swirling through the trenches that authorities were cracking down on the distribution of such seditious materials. Officers warned soldiers against reading or sharing subversive propaganda, issuing threats of disciplinary action. Whispers of arrests behind the lines caused unease and fear. One afternoon, as Thomas sat composing by flickering candlelight, a sharp knock came at the shack's door. 2 military police officers entered, their faces set with grim determination. "Private Weller, you are under arrest for the possession and dissemination of anti-war literature," the senior officer declared. Thomas felt a chill colder than any winter wind. His heart pounded fiercely, yet his voice remained steady as he said, "I only wrote what I saw, what we all lived through." The officers searched him, confiscating his notebooks and letters. The makeshift cell in the rear of the camp was damp and dark, but Thomas refused to relinquish hope. He thought of his comrades, the silent graves scattered like lost truths across the fields, and the poems now fluttering like fragile wings in the outside world. The trial was swift, a military tribunal that branded him a traitor, a threat to morale. Yet amidst the harsh verdict, whispers surfaced of the growing unrest among the troops, many sympathetic to Thomas's words. "Your Honor," the defense counsel had argued, "the verses are the voice of the common soldier trapped in a war no one truly understands. Punishment must not silence truth." His punishment was severe but tempered: loss of rank and solitary confinement, barred from returning to the front lines. But Thomas's spirit was unbroken. News reached him that Ink and Bayonets had inspired other soldiers to write, to speak, and a network was emerging to share honest accounts of the war. In his lonely confinement, Thomas composed quietly, verses filled with resolve rather than despair. "Though shackled by bayonet's cruel embrace, the ink shall trace the lines of truth's face. From silent trenches rise voices unseen, till peace dawns bright on fields once green." Months later, when an armistice finally descended over the bloodied land, Thomas was released amid the confusion of peace negotiations. The war had taken everything: friends, years, innocence, but it had not claimed his voice. Returning to London, he found the anti-war movement had swelled, fueled in part by the hidden verses of a soldier poet whose words had cracked through the armor of propaganda. The small press that had printed his work awaited him. Among the crowd were journalists, pacifists, and veterans who had found courage in Ink and Bayonets. Thomas's poetry was no longer just the desperate scratching of a lone man. It was the echo of countless souls yearning for peace. On a chilly autumn evening, Thomas stood before a gathering in a crowded hall, reading aloud. No more the guns to thunder, no more the fields to bleed. Let ink be mightier than bayonets, our future born of peace's seed. As applause washed over him, Thomas knew the path ahead would be long and fraught. But his verses, born in mud and misery, had taken wing. In ink lay hope. In words, the power to challenge even the fiercest bayonets. For more stories, like and subscribe.